Si je m'épanche sur toi.
This week we are sewing up the Delores of St Paul Peinoir robe. If you watched last week's video, I showed how I worked with the pattern a little bit, showed you the ins and outs of this neat vintage pattern, including the directions. The fabrics we're working on, I've already cut this apart, but it's this gorgeous lace that's got embroidery and three-dimensional flowers. It's actually a netting type lace, and we're also using this golden satin, so the lace and the satin go together. So the very first thing, we're just going to jump right into sewing. The very first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our front and our back and we're going to sew them together along the side seams so that I have one continuous piece, so I can start appliquing this along the hem. So I'm going to go ahead and sew my front and back together. I'm just serging it here on my overlock. The other thing I'm going to do is put the dart in the top of the sleeve. Here's my sleeve pattern. Now I've copied off my pattern. So I've got a little dart up here in the sleeve, and I cut out very carefully so that the dart falls between two of these embroidered flowers, because the sleeve is entirely the netting. The robe is entirely satin with some of the netting applied to it. So I'm going to go ahead and put this dart in, and I'm going to go ahead and sew the underarm seam of the dart as well, so that I can easily put the sleeve in when I'm ready. So those are the first two steps. After I've got the sleeve dart and the sleeve kind of put together and the front and back sewn to each other, we'll come back and I'll show you how I'm going to be start applying my lace edge to my hem, so you can see how that works. I've serged it together at the side seams. I'm going to show you from the inside. So here's the armhole where the sleeve is going to go, and I went ahead and serged the edge of the center front and the hem. I'm not doing any in the neckline because there's going to be some gathering and it's going to be caught up into a neckband that's faced. Let me show you the sleeve, because I'm going to go ahead and set the sleeve in now. So here's our lovely little sleeve. Isn't that pretty? And I laid it out so that the hem of the sleeve would have because of the wideness of the pattern. And then I also made sure that the dart went between the flowers. I'm not lining the sleeve. I'm going to have a nice sheer little sleeve. So I'm going to go ahead and set the sleeves in now. It's not a true set in because there's no shoulder cap. This is, again, sort of like raglan, and it has a neckband facing. So it's just the little U part, but no shoulder cap. Easy to put in. So I'm going to go ahead and serge in my sleeves really quickly. And I did not serge. This is netting. It doesn't come apart. It doesn't fray. So I just straight stitched the underarm of the sleeve, this part of the sleeve, because it just shows less. If I serged it, there's a lot of thread in there and it's very noticeable. So instead of doing that, I just straight stitched that part, but I am going to serge the actual sleeve in because I have the satin part of the garment that's frayable. So it'll just make it nice and neat too. So I'm going to put the sleeve in, and then we're going to head to my cutting table in the other room, and we're going to lay it out and start figuring out how we're going to applique our edge piece on the hem. So I'll see you over there in a minute with the sleeves in. Here's my gown, just laying it on the cutting table, and I have trimmed away the selvage edges of this because it has this nice band. So I have selvage edge from the right and left side. Because of that, though, these little curlicues go different directions. So you can see they're all facing this way, and then when I come over here, see they're facing the opposite. So what I've done is right here at this side seam, they switch directions. So for most of the garment, they all face like this, so they're all kind of going to the left. And on the front side of this, just this one part, they're going to go to the right. I could have had them meet in the back, and I considered it. It's not really a design detail that I'm concerned about. I have trimmed apart, so I've cut apart. This is actually open here. This is where I'm going to overlap to make my pattern come together. And I even have this is actually a little separate piece right here that's going to get pinned in and stitched down. So I'm actually going to come and stitch around all of this, and then I'm going to trim away all the excess netting. So that's going to take a little bit of time. It's an applique technique. You could totally stitch this by hand, come in and do a little handwork, This is a metallic thread, so I could choose metallic thread if I want to, or I think I'm going to try and get this goldy color back here. I also have some that's sort of between the netting and the gold that may blend. I'm going to try a couple threads to see which one I want to use, but I'm just going to stitch around my motif, kind of underneath the little flower here and around, and then I'm going to trim out all this excess netting, so that's going to go away, all this stuff in between. And one I forgot to show you, here's the sleeve end, so here's my little sleeve attached. And I haven't decided yet how I want to finish this edge. I'm kind of considering putting a bias strip like this along the edge, but I haven't decided yet. So if you're like me and you're taking a wide panel like this and applying it to this hem, which is curved, the area where you're going to be trimming out, you're going to have some excess. See how this lays flat, but see this is full, and that's all going to get trimmed away. So I'm pinning straight up as I go and then stitching around this and not worrying if this is flat or not. This is going to go away anyway. So we're just worrying about this area laying nice and flat because this gets trimmed away like that. When I'm stitching down the flowers, I actually come about 2 rows in, pull back the petals and stitch down so that when it's sewn in this area, and then these petals come back over the stitching and hide it. And then when I trim it away, it looks great. Just a quick close-up of the trim away as I go around. So this little area has been trimmed. And here's where I'm stitching. It's slow going, but it is really pretty, and I'm quite pleased with how it looks. I have appliqued all the way around the bottom of the netting. I've begun trimming it out. So this is sort of how it's going to look trimmed out. I folded back the facing edge just underneath the netting part and at the neck, because I'm going to go ahead and add the neckband now. I just want to get all my raw edges of the satin sealed up, because the satin, I'm actually going to just leave the trimming out the netting to the very end because I can completely finish it. So here's, you can see how it's beginning to look. I think it's very pretty. I'm really pleased with how pretty it is. It's very full. It's just so pretty. I think the netting on the bottom is giving it a nice weight too, to this nice full hemline. So here's a sleeve, and I'm going to cut out bias and edge the sleeve. I've decided. I've started pinning on my little neck facing, so I just have one neck facing right now. It takes a little basting stitch on the satin parts wherever the sleeve does not have any basting. The sleeve just has the little dart in it. So you put the shoulder seam of your neck band onto the dart and fold back the facing part. It's only a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and now I'm ready to start gathering this up to make it fit, but I'm going to pin on the sleeve because the sleeve's completely smooth. There's no gather, so I'm going to pin that on first. This is how it's looking. It's pretty straightforward. And once I get this one on, I will sew on my little loops. I'll show this. I'll do a couple close-ups for you so you can see, but I'm going to put the little loops on the front to go around the buttons. I'm going to put just maybe 2 to 3 little satin loops that I've already made out of this. I made some satin bias. I got to cut some more for my sleeve. So that's pretty much it, and then we're done. If you're doing the same method I am, where you're appliquing and netting like this along the bottom, it's very time-consuming. It took me a couple of, I would say, over 3 hours to slowly applique this around, and that was on the machine because I was being careful. And there's a lot of little pokies in and out to do, lots of design. If you're just applying lace, 10 minutes. Like, it would take you no time at all to just put a strip of lace around the bottom. So it depends on your choice of decorating this or not decorating it at all. You could totally do this all in tricot or satin or something like that and add no decoration if you want to. Okay, so I'm gonna get back to the neckband. Here's the little bias rope that I made to make my little loops, and I just have them pinned in. I'm gonna go ahead and just stitch across real quick to make them stay down, and then I can sandwich them in the facing like so and enclose it, and then I'll come back and whip stitch it on the inside, but I can go ahead and sew all the way around my neck band with its little facing and enclose my loops at the same time, and then I'll just hand sew on my pretty little buttons. So here's my bias strip, and I have sewn it the same size as my hem. So I have a little seam right here, and I'm just going to stitch right sides together. This is going to end up finishing off the hem. And once that's done, it'll fold over, and I'll hand stitch, whip stitch it from back to enclose this seam. But I'm just going to go around the circle right now and stitch this on. All right, so this is my sleeve. This is the inside. I've folded up my extra, and I'm just going to whip stitch this down from the inside, and this is what the outside will look like, so that the hem edge is going to be like that. Nice and pretty and soft and not very wide, just enough to give a little bit of coverage for that hem to protect it. Here's a quick look at the inside of the neck facing as I'm pinning it up to whip stitch it down. So this is the inside. You can see it's going to be just as pretty. Here's the outside. All right, and then I've done part of my hem on my sleeve. So here's the sleeve. And this little part has been stitched down. I haven't pressed anything yet, but that's how the hem is looking. So here's our finished little peignoir robe. And the thing about this robe, it's very simple. There's not a lot to it. So it's all in the fabrications in this case. I'm just going to hold this out so you can see how the hem turned out. Okay, it's a very simple little pattern, and the sewing of this is really very straightforward and not difficult at all. It's really the fabrications that give it its elegant and its vintage look. It is a vintage pattern, but by choosing this kind of three-dimensional embroidered netting, giving it a sheer sleeve with a little bias binding, this fun neckband. I used vintage buttons. I believe the card said 49 cents for 7 buttons, something like that. So those are some that were in my stash. So I think it's turned out really pretty. This is quite an elegant little piece. I'm going to make a satin little pajama set to go underneath it. This was so time consuming. The thing that was most time consuming was doing this hem, and it was not only just stitching it on, but then trimming away the excess. Really did take many hours, where if I had chosen to just do an all over lace or a lace trim, it probably would have taken less than an hour to do all of that decorative work. But this is how it turned out. I think it's lovely. All right, we'll see you next time for another pattern. And if you like my dress, I'll put the link up so you can make this. This was a pattern we did last summer, I guess. It's been quite a while, but I love this little dress. So, all right, see you next time.
Mais quand la brise rapporte ton parfum à ma porte, je ne pense plus qu'à toi. Ça fait beaucoup, mais c'est comme ça.